Yeah, we can get started. So now we're being recorded. So I'd like to welcome everyone that's on here tonight and those that will watch this later. This is one of our NAMI presentations. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and the La Crosse Vernon chapters put on 5 of these different presentations this month for Mental Health Month. This is the 5th one. Today's the 31st of May, and we'll move into another program next month. But we're really honored to have the La Crosse School District back again. They're going to present on social and emotional learning, or SEL. Do you say SEL or just SEL?
SEL, SEL, it gets, people refer to it in a variety of ways.
Fine. SEL is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. So this is sort of a preemptive program to get people to be able to deal with stuff, I assume, to reduce their stress and not have the bigger issues that come when they don't do that. So tonight we have 2 people that will present, Tracy Caravella and Carrie Holter, and we're glad to have them here tonight. Tracy did present a couple weeks ago on AWARE, I believe, and that was a good presentation. So we're real honored to have you here tonight, and I guess, you know, we don't have that many, so I don't know if you need to have everybody's background or not, but if you want to do that, that's fine. But we'll start with you, Tracy, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Tracy Caravella, and I'm the Project AWARE Grant Coordinator for the School District of La Crosse. And partnering with me tonight, I'll let her introduce herself, is...
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Holter. I am currently serving as the Northwoods International Principal. Prior to that, I did this work at Holman Middle School for about 12 years. And prior to that, taught high school at Badger High School in the southeastern portion of the state.
Okay, I'll go next. I'm Helen Kelly. I'm the Vice President of La Crosse, NAMI La Crosse. I'm so happy that the school district could come here and make a presentation again tonight. In my day job, I'm an attorney and I do a lot of work with kids and families. And so these presentations have been really informative and interesting, and hopefully I can pass the information along and help out my clients.
Nicole?
Yep, I'll go next. My name is Nicole Latond. I am also on the board of directors. I primarily manage our website and our Facebook. I currently am a stay-at-home mom and teach some group fitness classes at the YMCA, but in my prior life, I was an occupational therapist for 15 years, primarily in mental health and pediatrics. I'm on temporary hiatus from that with the intention of going back when my kids are a little bit older.
All right, and Nicole's on our NAMI board of directors, as is Helen and myself. Gail, do you want to go next? So you just have to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we can go to Karen next. She can unmute herself. There you go.
Hey, Karen Kroll, just retired, used to be the youth services coordinator for the county libraries. So married to somebody here, but anyway, all right.
All right, thanks. All right, Gail's still not up. I wonder if we lost somebody. I'll just let you know that I'm a judge here in La Crosse County. It's been over 15 years. I was a prosecutor before that. They keep making me run these different boards. I'm the president of our local NAMI. I'm a vice president of the Lighthouse. If you don't know what that is, that's a respite care center that was set up really recent to get people in to sort of stabilize for a few days as they're getting their acts together and getting referrals. What else am I on? Campaign to Change Direction, which tries to promote mental well-being. I'm on a lot of different groups that actually promote mental well-being, even statewide. I'm on the task force for Wisconsin lawyer well-being, and on the Wisconsin Lawyer Assistance Program on those boards. So I have a lot of mental health in my background. It comes in handy being a judge to try to deal with people appropriately. So go ahead, Tracy.
All right. I'm going to share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I had asked if people, and this is sort of share if you're willing to share, but can you think of a time in the last few days where you recognize you managed your stress in a healthful way? And it could be a small thing. So for instance, this past weekend, my beloved dog decided to lay right in the middle of a beautiful hosta, and I like my garden, and he basically destroyed the hosta. And I did not yell at him, which, you know, I laughed, and I try to use humor as a coping mechanism for stress. And I find that that is a helpful tool for me. So I recognize a preferred stress management technique for myself is using humor. I basically took a picture of my dog on the hosta, posted it to Facebook, and made a joke. So anybody else willing to share?
I can share. I have been feeling stressed out about the end of the school year and my two kids being home with me full time all summer. And just kind of feeling like I had a lot I needed to tackle in this final week before they were home. And so one thing that works really well for me is list making and prioritizing.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Thanks, Nicole. Anybody else willing to share?
Well, right now I am dealing with a back injury, and this is the most active time of the year for me with gardening and hiking and getting out in the woods. And I was very stressed about all the things that I couldn't do. So I asked for help, which is not the easiest thing for me to do. So I asked for and accepted the help that people were willing to give to me.
Great example. Thanks, Carrie.
So I will share. I have a lot of deadlines for cases and other commitments. And so I was going to spend the entire week working in my office, but I got up early in the morning, went outside and pulled weeds. And I love to go out and pull weeds. It's so relaxing. It's so satisfying when you yank that weed up and the whole root and everything comes off in one piece. It's a lot like pulling someone's head off with the spine intact. And so that relaxes me. I mean, I just love it. And the birds are out singing. And I like to be out there early before, you know, the kids are out yelling and running around and the lawnmowers start, because it's so peaceful and wonderful at that time of the morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, as a judge, I see stressful things every day in and day out, deal with people that are stressed and can't control themselves. And I try to not take it home and try to work through it, keep myself active outside of court and put court out of my mind. So the vicarious trauma and other things that I could pick up have little effect on me. Incidentally, I don't watch the news then much because all that stress will come in from another angle and I don't need that. So that's kind of how I do that.
Yeah, thank you. WB, do we know who WB's first name is?
I don't think so.
Okay. Would you like to share, WB? That's okay. All right, well, we will get started. Tell me what you see. Are you seeing our little slide deck?
Yep.
Okay, great. So tonight we are going to talk about what is social emotional learning. We're going to explore, and social emotional learning, many of us use the acronym SEL or CEL. We're going to explore social emotional learning competencies. We're going to talk about a relatively recent movement. When I say recent, in the last 5-6 years, school-wide SEL, and give you some examples of the school district's initiatives to implement school-wide SEL. Carrie Holter is going to share some data from Northwoods International School and answer questions. So for those of you who were with us a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Project Aware, I really prefer, and I chatted with Carrie about this too, we like to have questions while we're presenting. So please feel comfortable sharing or discussing. We're really kind of hoping that we have a conversation and not just a monologue, because that, just ask us or clarify or whatever as we go. And so can people see the screen all right? Can you see all that's there? Good deal. So a big guru in the social emotional learning world academically is the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And their acronym is CASEL, kind of like the really big buildings in Scotland or England, but without a T. And so CASEL is a group that we're going to be talking a lot about tonight, and we've used many of their resources. We also will be talking about our state, Wisconsin DPI. The DPI has worked with CASEL closely, and just two powerhouses. So the data that you're seeing, the information is coming from CASEL and our Wisconsin DPI, and then a couple of curricula that we will be talking about in a little bit. So as the judge shared, social emotional learning is a process through which all people, children, teens, adults, older adults, can acquire knowledge and skills and hopefully develop attitudes to help people live with healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy towards others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And social emotional learning is a very authentic, real way to try to establish or advance educational equity. And when Dr. Erin Engel joined our school district, we began to really approach education from a whole child framework, which was to value academics, and that's very, very important. But, in order to perform well academically, we really need to be able to manage ourselves and our relationships with others. So here we go. Let's see, I'm just trying to figure out. There we go. Okay. So the benefits of SEL include improved student social emotional learning, relationships, academic performance, perceptions of safety, and improved school climate. Students typically, if there is a strong social emotional learning program or programs in place, they will report a decline in student anxiety, and you'll have less behavior problems. And incorporating social emotional learning into a school building helps improve student skills, attitudes, behavior, and also the staff's attitudes, and behavior. And their research has shown, and this research has been going on for a couple of decades, but they actually show for every dollar spent towards prevention, which is social emotional learning, you actually have like about an average of $11 savings. So if you put money into focusing on prevention, you actually save money long term. Again, we're going to talk about CASEL and their framework. Is anybody here besides Carrie? Is anybody familiar? Have you heard of CASEL? Not seeing any indicators of that. Okay, so their framework is this little pie shaped graphic. It's social emotional learning's in the middle. We're going to dive in tonight to each one of these domains: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and then responsible decision-making. And the catalyst for these domains to be practiced, to be taught, to be practiced, are classrooms and schools, and then our families, and then our communities. So this work is community work. It's not just happening in a classroom.
And Tracy, I'd just like to say that no matter what profession everybody's in, we sometimes get visualized and acronymed to death.
Yes.
And, so when you look at these things, you think to yourself, why isn't it a pyramid? Why isn't it a dog dish? It's changed. It's done these things. But at the same time, if you look at what the core of it is, and you have what our outcome is that we want to have of social emotional learning, then what are those skills? And then who's responsible for teaching those skills, and who's responsible providing the time, the resources, and the policies. And then beyond that, who's responsible in our community to go further than we can with a different skill set. I'm not a therapist and I can't diagnose problems. So we need to lean on our community members to gather around this child too. And then community as a whole, whether it be different organizations, and that could be everything from connecting a student to summer camps or BGC or a mentor, or even something more formal on the county side. But I really like this because it looks at what is the most important is in the very middle, but then all the systems that have to align and learn together in order for it to be done in a way that is sustainable.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. And a little later on, we're going to share a timeline of where the school district is at. And this past year, it has been really fun. Like BGC is, contacted us and asked us about our social emotional learning curriculum. The Y has asked us to chat with them and some of the parent groups at the Y about this work. And it is exciting watching it spread from our school district to the community where we know it needs to go. So thank you, Carrie, for that. So what we're going to do now, and again, hopefully folks are willing to share, but we're going to focus on the very first SEL domain, social emotional learning domain, which is self-awareness. Now, remember at the very beginning of our time together this evening, I asked you to think about a time over the past few days where you recognized that you managed some stress in a positive way, right? That requires two skills. One, self-awareness, your ability to be reflective and recognize that you were feeling stressed. And then the next slide, we'll talk about self-management, which is the stress management piece. But so let's chat. In your profession as an adult, let's just keep this about our professions. Why? Here are examples of self-awareness skills. why would it be important for somebody in your profession to have the skill and to be able to practice self-awareness?
Tracy, I can jump in on this, is that I think a lot of times people react to having these feelings without really taking the time to stop and understand what it is they're feeling. And in the curriculum that we use at school, and I'll talk a little bit more about adult SEL, because these aren't just skills that kids have to learn. We have to learn them right along with them and model them. But when I look at things like this, I look at identifying one's emotions. I think we're getting better in education of, it's okay to say in front of your class, like, wow, I am feeling really frustrated right now. I need to take a couple of deep breaths, or I need to go sit over here for 30 seconds so I can get myself together. Or, I just want to let you guys know that I am feeling very sad today. So things might not be exactly as they are, but I'm really trying to work through it. So I think historically speaking, naming our emotions was always a sign of weakness. We're not supposed to have emotions, especially if you're in positions of power. And I think we're trying to take that back now and saying, this is how I'm feeling, and watch me model how I'm going to get through that in a healthy way, instead of doing all of the things that we might do to cover up that emotion or make it seem like it's not a weakness on our part.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Absolutely right. Thank you, Carrie.
It's also a beautiful way for our school equity plan to start coming in, of looking at what identities are and getting that perspective, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but understanding that not everything is the same, and without having a knee-jerk reaction to something that is different from what you've known, but instead turning that into curiosity and the willingness to learn more and be a little bit more self-reflective. It's amazing. I mean, I can see 4-year-olds doing this. And if I hadn't seen it for myself, that would be very hard for me to believe. But when I go into, for example, a 4K classroom, they can tell me what it means to be principled. And part of that is our International Baccalaureate curriculum, but they're understanding what these concepts mean in action. And then when they get to spots that are bumpy, then they're able to reflect better and hopefully go forward and change that behavior in the future.
It's exciting. It's exciting. Does anybody have an example of why self-awareness would be important for people in your profession?
Well, I could speak to that from my position as a judge. If I'm not self-aware of how I'm appearing on the bench, it's going to disrupt the courtroom and allow people that can't control themselves to continue to be out of control and perhaps affect others to act like that. I had a person in today that I was trying to set bond on, and he kept interrupting me. So I stopped and let him go on and on, even though he should have been done already. And finally, he saw that I wasn't talking, and I asked if he had anything else to say, and he said no. And I said, well, then let me speak, and don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. So you have to maintain that calmness to maybe help influence others to maintain a calmness and get back on track and try to, be able to identify their issues, listen to them, and sort of apply it to the situation so you don't make things worse.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to manage our emotions if we're not aware of them, right? If we don't understand them. And so Carrie's example of 4-year-olds, that's beautiful. Before taking this position with the La Crosse School District, I spent 3 years up in Bemidji, Minnesota, teaching at the university up there. And I was on the board of the Boys and Girls Club. And they were using a curriculum, a social emotional learning curriculum, much like our district does, called Zones of Regulation. And after a board meeting, one of the one of the supervisors said, I have to tell you about an 8th grade boy. This young man really struggles with anger issues. He just struggles with anger and he blows up. Well, yesterday he came into our office and he just said, I just need some quiet time. I just need to get more composed. And I thought, wow, imagine this young man, an 8th grader. Imagine where he could be when he's 19 and 20 as he's developing these skills now in 8th grade, right? And then I thought, oh my gosh, imagine if he wasn't able to practice these skills, where he could be at age 19 and 20. So self-awareness is like the foundational starting point to being able to manage ourselves. And so the next domain, the next competency is self-management, which we talked about, which we've been talking about. These two go hand in hand. Again, hard to think through anything if we are so emotional that, intellectually, we don't think clearly. We know science, we know this. If our amygdala is firing in our brain, it's going to be really challenging for us to be rational. And so how do we learn how to manage our emotions? And, Carrie's school is doing a great job of implementing one of these curricula, these CL curricula we'll talk about. Does anybody want to make a comment or have a question about self-management before we move on to the next domain? Just want to give everybody time if they need it.
I just want to say how excited I am that these SEL curriculums are being used in schools now. Back when I was practicing as a therapist in outpatient pediatrics, we would have kids specifically coming to see us to work on the Zones for Regulation program. And it just seemed, at the time, it seemed like it wasn't maybe the best use of resources, like it could be incorporated so much in their day-to-day life. Why are their parents having to drive them for an additional 45-minute out-of-school session when it's really just, it's more functional for them to learn it in the moment at school or at home where the issues are impacting them. So it makes so much sense to me, and I'm happy to see it finally happening.
I will say at Northwoods, we use zones all the time, again, to help students calm down and take a pause of, are you in your thinking brain? Are you in your feeling brain? When you're in your feeling brain, what are strategies you've used? How does your body feel right now? Do you need time by yourself? Do you need to color or listen to music, with the ultimate goal of getting them back to the classroom, back in the green zone, ready to learn? That's the goal of all of this. Our goal as schools is learning, but all of these things need to be in place before that learning can occur. So what does it feel like? We have a teacher right now going into classrooms and talking about, what does this feel like when your body does this? How do you feel that in your jaw, in your hands, in your back, in your breathing, so that they can start to see the connection between their emotions and how their body physically feels, so that the goal would be that they can catch it earlier and then apply some of these strategies that they know that works for them in order to work themselves back down into their thinking brain and then do the actual processing and repair that's needed.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicole. I appreciate you sharing that. And Carrie, how long has zones been in being used? Do you know? Because several schools were using it when I got here in 2019.
Yeah, it's been going, and it was a district initiative quite a while ago. I think some schools have held on to it more than others, but the way that we've looked at it at Northwoods is that common language, the common signage, the common strategies is just like the equity plan, just links absolutely perfectly to what we're trying to do with SEL. So let's use the most research-based techniques and put them all to bear so that we can start getting better results for kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments on self-management before we move forward? Okay. So social awareness, right? Social, it's unless we are going to work independently and not communicate with anybody else, maybe social awareness isn't so important. However, we're recognizing that today collaboration is so important. So important. Just before we began, Helen and Carrie and I were chatting. We were sort of bemoaning the fact that too often we work in silos. And so we really do need to develop skills to recognize how other people are expressing their thoughts and feelings, and then, you know, how do we respond to that appropriately? Any comments or questions about social awareness?
To me, really, they're all important, and there's no need to prioritize one above the other. But for me, this is the most important one in terms of building citizens and a better society. Because I think with understanding the perspectives that people are thinking, rather than jumping to conclusions about why people think the way that they do, trying to really put yourself in their shoes, understanding different things that happen in society and how they may affect us different than, you know, the next person standing next to us. I believe that's how we build a more just society that's willing to listen and change and, you know, use evidence to make things better. So this one is one of the hardest ones I've seen putting to use in the elementary, because as they're so small, you know, their world revolves around themselves and what they feel, and bringing them to a point where they can actually take the perspective of the other person is difficult. But I think that's a life skill that you need, not only for the person right in front of you, but for the person you're reading about in the news, or, you know, the person that you're voting for. And so I think when we're talking about building citizens, I think this is one of the most critical components.
I agree. I agree. Anybody else, comments or questions? Okay, we'll keep moving forward. And then following social awareness are relationship skills. So putting into practice, being able to recognize those, the way people are expressing themselves, but then actually managing that recognition in appropriate ways. Going back to this 8th grade student up in Bemidji who is learning how to deal with his anger. You know, when I learned that, it touched me personally, because I'm in my 50s and I have a younger brother who's in his 50s, and he has not yet learned how to manage his anger well. And it's sad because it impacts our relationship. And I just think, gosh, you know, as Nicole shared, how neat it is to see these skills and these tools being taught to younger students, so that maybe a couple of decades from now, we have a generation of 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds who have less issue managing their emotion. You know, maybe they will have had an opportunity to learn and practice these skills.
And I just think with the pressure that is on families now, that has been exacerbated a million times by the pandemic, you know, a lot of times where these skills are learned are at home. And students, we can no longer assume that students are going to come in with the skills to have healthy, supportive relationships, and the coping mechanisms that they're being taught by the people they love the most in the world it just makes sense that they would try to use those same coping mechanisms when they're in school, because when they see them at home, they see them work. And so that is something that is very hard to overcome in an educational context of trying to measure, this is what your family believes in, this is what you're seeing at home, this is what's modeled to you, and in some cases, this is what's being done to you, to be able to code switch back to the educational environment and ensure that they feel safe, and that when we have problems here, we're going to approach them in a different way, and then hope to give them their skills so that they can do that when they're outside our buildings.
Right. Yeah. So important, all of this. Anyone else before we move on to responsible decision making? Okay, moving forward. So the last of the core competencies for the CASEL framework relates to responsible decision making. So you have an awareness of self, so you can manage yourself in a healthful way. So you are socially aware and you do have healthy relationships. Now, how can you make healthy decisions? And we know that our families, many of them have been impacted by the opioid epidemic. Everything that we're hearing about with the pandemic is that mental health has, for adults and youth, mental health has become an issue for many people. Anxiety is up, depression is up. And then those issues end up impacting our ability to make responsible decisions. So, and Carrie mentioned this earlier, being willing to be curious and open-minded about something that's going on rather than judgmental and closed. It doesn't help continue the conversation or anybody grow when people are being judgmental and not trying to look deeper as to what's going on. Why is that going on? Comments at all about responsible decision making? Okay. All right. Well, now, and we could spend a whole hour just talking about the CASEL framework, but we do have other things that we want to dive into. But again, as you think about the framework, we spent some time talking about the 5 core competencies, and now here are the settings. Here are the settings that CASEL believes are really integral to practicing and achieving skill development. The classroom, right? The classroom, our schools, families and caregivers and communities. And again, part of our equity work is to make sure that we have authentic relationships with our families, with the caregivers of the children in our district. Any comments or before we continue moving forward? Carrie's got some really good data to share with you. I think we're gonna.
Yeah, I think it's just important to know that, I've been in education for 24 years now, and it may have been possible to do it as just a school 24 years ago. But with the types of problems that we have now and the things that our kids are going against, the school can only do so much. And we have to have those community partners, even if they're just thought partners, but also people who are brave enough to take a look at systems and saying, this isn't working for kids. How can we change this so that, we can see some results, and then taking some of those risks to try new things that haven't been done before.
Yeah. And so here is a graphic from CASEL that demonstrates what school-wide SEL is all involved with. So here in the classroom, up here in the classroom, we have explicit instruction. And so in just a minute, we're going to talk to you about curricula that the school district has purchased through Project Aware and has been trying to implement. And then the long-term goal for the district is to get the faculty to be able to implement Wisconsin SEL competencies in their instruction. And some of our teachers are already doing that. Social emotional learning is not new. It's been around as long as education has been around. Because hopefully each one of you can remember a time when you had an educator that you could tell they cared about you. You mattered to them. They took an interest in you, right? That was part of social emotional learning. You having an opportunity to reflect on any of your schoolwork at any point in time, you being encouraged not to quit, but to keep going. That's part of social emotional learning. Here's the new part to social emotional learning, which is to do it intentionally and purposefully, right? And so to get every adult in the building on the same page and with the same level of understanding about social emotional learning, and then to continue to implement it, not just within the school, but into the community as well. So in a little bit, Carrie's going to share some information about adult social emotional learning that she was able to gain. Does anybody have any comments at all about school-wide social emotional learning before we move forward? Okay.
Tracy, I do have a comment. What is the projected timeline for implementing, this? Because I'm sure it's just not one school year. You probably have to work with the students for a number of years to help them develop their full understanding of that.
Yes, we have purchased at the K-8 level. You're going to see a little information about Second Step, which is a digital SEL curriculum. And the school district was able to purchase that curriculum for 5 years through Project Aware dollars. And then at the high school level, this coming fall, we're just beginning to implement School Connect, and that will be for 3 years at the high school level. So how long will it take? This has been our first year, K-8, that we were working on implementing Second Step social emotional learning curriculum, kindergarten through 8th grade. Now, it was a pilot year, Helen, and we are still dealing with the impact of the pandemic. So right now, honestly, we've been sharing some data. Some of our schools, Carrie began the school year last fall, just really excited about trying to get some data. Because that's how we want to make improvements, right? We don't want to just have anecdotal information is helpful, but nothing is as helpful as actually taking a step back and looking at some data. And so Carrie has sort of been a champion in our district for that. So in just a minute, she's going to share. But so what we're doing now is trying to get the word out about the data that we have access to, and then helping our schools make plans to improve their implementation for fall. Did that answer your question?
Well, yeah, kind of. What happens after the purchase period expires?
Well, we were hoping that by then we would be at that point where we have gotten our educators, their knowledge and skill raised to the point where they know how to integrate social emotional learning into their instruction, and that they can incorporate social emotional learning competencies into their instruction. So for instance, CASEL, this group that we've been talking about, they have 3 high leverage practices that they think everybody should try to incorporate, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a class. And one of them I tried to do tonight with our group. So to begin with some sort of a welcome or grounding or icebreaker, begin every interaction with people on some sort of a welcoming, activity. 2, try to engage your students during a lesson. If you're teaching a lesson, at some point during the lesson, the students have to be actively engaged. If you're in a meeting, you need to get audience participation, right? Otherwise, it's easy to be passive and maybe not paid so much attention. And then 3, at the very end on an optimistic note. So CASEL says if you do those 3 activities for lessons and for meetings, that alone will raise the level of social emotional learning. But our end goal is to try to get those Wisconsin State social emotional learning competencies woven into K-12 instruction. Does that help?
Yeah, that sounds, makes sense.
Okay. This is going to take time. So,
Well, and I can see it's going to take time trying to incorporate the community, families, and into that entire process. And by that time, a child could have gone all the way through their K to 12 years.
well, as I said, we're hearing more and more of our community partners asking us questions and wanting to know more about social emotional learning. So that's a big kudo to them.
Right.
So hopefully, within the next 3 to 5 years, we will see some big gains. But in the interest of time, and when we had nearly 10 of our schools attend a CASEL school-wide workshop training, and here was the workshop. They were split into 4 sessions, and one was establishing shared understanding of what systematic SEL is, like what is SEL. 2, this is the powerhouse, strengthening adult SEL, because so frequently this is another new addition, I think, to school-wide SEL. A lot of adults are like, well, social emotional learning, that's for the kids. Well, yeah, it makes sense to teach them, but I'm an adult, I don't need this. And our reality is that no one leaves our world mastering all of social emotional learning. We just don't. We're human. We sometimes, we are reactive rather than responsive. And so adults need to practice this. And Carrie's got some really great data to share. And then promoting what does social emotional learning look like for students, and then practicing continuous improvement. This is just a quick overview. This gives you spring of 2021. 9 schools attended this training that I just shared with you. They were asked to develop social emotional learning goals for adults and youth in their building. We had district meetings. They shared those goals with other schools. And then at the end of the spring semester of 2021, we identified second step after a thorough review. And we had, I think, about 60 people reviewing curricula. So it was a shared experience. And then in summer 2021, we had 10 staff members, 2 other schools attend the CASEL workshop training. And then this past fall, we worked on implementing, but it was a pilot, and we've learned a lot. And then this past year, School Connect 4.0 has been identified for our high school. And on this note, I'm going to let Carrie take over and share with you what we're looking at right now.
So this process that I went through with staff, actually, we took a very shortened survey, and these aren't all of the questions. We took a survey to gauge at the beginning of the presentation of rolling second step out, what were people nervous about? What was their general thoughts about buy-in to the program, and how were they feeling? So those results at the very beginning, and unfortunately that survey is gone, so I can't go back to what those were, but how staff were feeling in the very beginning was very anxious. And so I thought that we really needed to acknowledge that. Again, in a pandemic year, lots of things on people's plates, lots of gaps for students, both in their academics and social emotional learning. Then we used a slightly changed version of the CASEL rollout program to teach people really what it was and to reassure them that it is something that is not going to take a lot of your time. It's not going to take a lot of preparation. It's high value materials, and it really achieves the purpose of what we're going for. So within one day, we took the survey and they said how nervous they were feeling. We did the presentation on what it actually was that you'd be responsible for and walked them through a lesson. And then we collected data afterwards to see, now that you've seen this, and yet they still hadn't opened up their accounts and been able to play at this point, but how are you feeling now? And so I think whenever you put something on someone's plate, regardless of how for it you know that they are, I don't think I'm going to have a single staff member in my school that would say social emotional learning is not important, but then how to balance that with all of the other necessities at school. So this is just to show that the implementation process, I think if you take it very methodically and make sure that you know how people are feeling and what they need, it can increase success. And I believe all of our teachers in the entire school got through all of the 20-second step lessons this year. So Shelley, if you want to, or Tracy, if you want to go to the next one.
Sure.
So on this one, it talked about what kinds of things that people found most valuable. So there were also the ability for teachers to just type in here. So brain builders, student worksheets, guided discussion, videos with lessons, simple lessons that build off each other. Students can actually work collaboratively and share, especially in discussions. And they really did a nice job in a way that I didn't think was too hokey in making real life connections with kids. Sometimes I feel like the people who make these videos have never met a kid before. And in this case, they really made some good connections. And then student response to second step lessons, you can see that overall, the majority were very engaged, or at least partially engaged. This is about what I would expect from any kind of curriculum program that goes in. Typically, it's not going to be 100% for everybody, but this tells me some really, really good numbers that we're seeing. And then checking in on teachers. One of the things that they were worried about is getting everything in their time. And all of the teachers that responded that are responsible for this curriculum said the pacing for that was just right. Then I think I got one more. Then another thing that we did when Tracy and I talked is we wanted to look at adult SEL, and we wanted to see what kinds of things are our teachers saying in their own SEL journeys. Do they need some additional support in? So we did this great stole from CASEL, I think, Tracy, this great questionnaire for teachers and had them take it. And so there were questions like these: I show care for others, or I recognize the strengths of young people, where you can see that a lot of teachers felt pretty confident that, yeah, this is a pretty easy social emotional skill for me. But then if you go over to the next slide, Tracy, these are the kinds of questions where I started seeing an opportunity for us to provide some differentiated professional development for teachers. And so you can see what I'm upset with someone. I talk about how I feel and listen to their perception, to their perspective. We're asking our kids to do this as part of this curriculum. But then if you look, up on the top, the number of teachers that say that's difficult or very difficult signals to me that we need to do some work on this. Or if you look at the next question, I can get through something even when I'm frustrated. A lot of people are finding that difficult. In the final question, I can take action and impact change on issues that are important to me in the larger community. A lot of staff feeling that's difficult and very difficult. So that to me just signals that we need to dig deeper into that, find out what that means, and then provide people either the empowerment, the resources, the time, or the tools so that they feel like they can gain in these areas.
Does anybody have any questions about the data that Carrie gathered? And I know it's about, I know we're almost out of time. We just have a couple more slides, but if we need to end, we need to end. Can we keep going for another 5 minutes, sir?
You can keep going. Go ahead.
Okay, so this is what our second step elementary curriculum looks like. There are 4 units, and those 4 units get repeated every grade level, but developmentally increase as age increases. So the first unit's growth mindset and goal setting, second unit, emotional management, third, empathy and kindness, fourth unit is problem solving. Each unit has 5 lessons. If you are in kindergarten or first grade, those lessons are 15 to 20 minutes long. And if you are a second through 5th grader, those lessons are 25 to 30 minutes long. Any questions or comments about that? Okay, at the middle school level, the units, there are still 4 units, and those units do, again, every 6th grader, every 7th grader, every 8th grader, when they're in the second step curriculum, they're taking these 4 units. However, the 6th grade curriculum is developmentally appropriate for 6th grade, and the 7th grade lessons are developmentally appropriate for 7th grade. So you see that the topics are similar, but a little different. Mindsets and goals begins the unit or begins the curriculum. And then you see unit 2 is recognizing bullying and harassment, a very big issue that needs to have attention at the middle school level. And then thoughts, emotions, decisions, and then 4, managing relationships and social conflict. All total, there are 27 lessons, and the grade, they're distributed a little differently than the even 5 lessons per unit for the elementary level. And then this fall, our School Connect digital curriculum will be being implemented at Central High and Logan High. And these are the modules for that curriculum, the titles. Each module has 10 lessons. And right now there are a couple of teams, one at each building, that are planning how they are going to be introducing this to their staff in August. And on that note, I shared the big heavy hitter resources. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as we are coming to a conclusion and entertain questions or comments.
Well, again, it's good to see how the schools are trying to address the well-being of students. I could have commented earlier, all these things where you're trying to build these things. A lot of them get the opposite behaviors exhibited to them in their homes, and that's what they then exhibit when they go out in public or schools. And a lot of those end up seeing people like me. So if you can get them to turn it around to include that home, that's really important for the well-being of our society and these individuals.
Yeah, one of the second step curriculum has been around for quite some time. It's only been in its digital format for, I believe, a couple of years. But one of the second step advantages is they have just a lot of rich family resources that can be used during units of instruction to educate families and caregivers about what students are learning in the curriculum. So as we get better at implementing school-wide SEL and using the tools that the curricula have available to us, again, it's just going to be another avenue of communication and sharing information about social emotional learning that will spread beyond the walls of the school building.
And do you find that it's hard for impoverished families or families with excess mental illness issues to be able to incorporate this at home? Because I see a lot of those families where, these adults have no capacity to even take care of themselves, much less influence their kids to grow up like you're trying to promote.
Yeah.
And that's why those community supports are so important, because in those cases, we can't do it by ourselves. We can't do it without the help of the county or medical, professionals or social workers, all of that. There's only so much we can do within the walls of our building, but it's the coordination between all those people toward a common goal that makes it an extremely difficult situation more likely to at least take some steps forward.
Well, that's good.
Right. And, you know, I know you've heard Dr. Engel speak before, but the big goal here is to raise our resiliency, right? So that if we are having issues in our home where there are adverse childhood experiences, or we're coming to school having experienced some trauma, that we're still able to thrive, even though we might have experienced some pretty big hardship along our life journey, right? But it does, you know, that old saying about it takes a village. It certainly does. It takes a community. It not just one teacher, not just one school, but, you know, community. So we really appreciate your attention and willingness to invite us. And gosh, there's so much more to talk about, but I know our time is coming to an end.
A very good presentation, and like we said, it will be recorded, put on our website. Anyone else have any questions or comments before we adjourn for tonight?
Just thank you guys very much.
All right, well, next month, June, is LGBTQ month, apparently, I think is what they call it. And on the 21st, we have the executive director for our local group here. I don't have the exact names, but she'll be presenting on that. So might be an interesting presentation for some of the people that you discussed, you know, in the diversity area. I mean, a lot of people fit into this category as well, and watch for that. All right. Again, thank you so much. We appreciate it and what you're doing, and to take the time to spend it with us. So.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.